All right, everybody, it's 2 o'clock. Welcome to our first of two series, mini series here on the on. So you want to write a spirituality book. Um, I'm really excited. There's a lot of people I know who are excited about this series. And for folks who are wondering, it will be recorded, and we will send out the recording shortly thereafter, and also post it on our YouTube channel. I want to welcome everybody. This is an initiative of the Jesuit Media Lab. Folks likely know the Jesuit Media Lab because you had to sign up for this by going to that site. But in short, the JML really exists to bridge the gap between spirituality and creativity, giving folks a lot of different ways to connect the dots in poetry, in filmmaking, and writing, just thinking creatively, using the tradition of Ignatian spirituality. So we're excited that this is one of our new initiatives. Another initiative, just to do a little advertising, we're going to have our next Jesuit book club featuring Alice McDermott and her new book Absolution next month. So sign up for that. Now, I'd like to, I should introduce myself. I'm the Deputy Director for Communications at the Jesuit Conference of Canada, United States. I'm also an author who has had the great privilege of working with all three of our panelists in their professional capacity. So I will be able to vouch for their great credentials. And now let me introduce each person on the panel, and then I will. Oh, my mic has a lot of static. All right, let me turn it down. Is this any better? Is this any better? Good.
Sounds fine.
Sounds fine. Okay. I'll back away a little bit too. So our first panelist, Keely Boving, is a senior agent at WordServe Literary, where she has worked since 2015. She represents a wide range of genres and subjects in both the general and Christian markets, particularly in the areas of literature and the arts, theology, health and wellness, spiritual formation, and the intersection of faith and culture. Gary Jansen is the executive director and director for new products and acquisitions at Loyola Press and 4U2B Books and Media. Prior to that, he worked at Penguin Random House for 25 years, where he was the editor on several New York Times bestsellers. Gary is also the author of several best-selling books, and his latest, I have right here, Meditations at Midnight, Poetry and Prose, so you can pick that up. And finally, Vanita Hampton Wright edited books for 32 years, retiring in 2021. She's written various fiction and nonfiction books, most recently Set the World on Fire, a 4-week personal retreat with the female doctors of the church. Here it is. She's a spiritual director and continues to facilitate retreats and write fiction and nonfiction. I will plug one more of her books, The Art of Spiritual Writing, which is very helpful book, particularly of interest to folks on this call. So that's our panel. I'm really excited. Let me see. Folks are, is anyone else hearing static on my end?
You sound good on my end.
Sounds good. Okay. All right. I'm not sure. I will adjust if other folks can chime in there. But let's get started. I gave very brief overviews of folks' careers, but I want to give each of our panelists a chance to tell us kind of their own professional history. So let's start. Keely, we'll start with you. Maybe you can talk about how did you begin your career? How did you begin your career? And did you set out to be in the space of spiritual writing, or did you kind of get here by happenstance?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I'm happy to be here with all of you guys. I did not set out to work specifically in Christian publishing or spiritual writing, but I knew I wanted to work in publishing. So after college, I moved to New York, had a couple different jobs there, but spent most of my time at Oxford University Press, working as an assistant editor on their trade history list. And then when I moved back to Denver, which is where I'm from and got a lot of family here, so when we were having kids, we moved back to Denver. I left OUP and started freelancing, and then began looking for more stable work, and eventually got hooked up with WordServe Literary, which is based just outside of Denver. And their primary focus is Christian books. And so I sort of transitioned. Now I spend about maybe 75% of my time representing books in the faith market and 25% still in the general market.
Awesome. Thanks, Keely. Gary, how about same question for you? Tell us a little bit about your career, and did you intentionally aim to be in spiritual writing?
Great. Eric, thanks so much for having me on here today. And it's great to be with everybody. So I was making like little books from like marble notebooks. Like I would take out all the pages when I was a little kid. And I would put in new pages and write stories, basically riffing off Stephen King. And so I think from a young age, I always wanted to be a writer. So I was an English major in school, and I got a job in publishing probably about a year after I graduated, and then worked at Random House in various capacities over 25 years. And yeah, started off as just an editorial assistant and then just kind of like moved up through the ranks. And I remember this day because it was January 20th, 2005. I've been numerous years out of school, had written in journals for such a long time. And I was on a retreat at the Ignatius or at the St. Ignatius Retreat House in Manhasset, New York. And I pulled out a notebook and I dated it January 20th, 2005. I said, I have to get serious about writing and I'm going to write every day, 3 pages, half hour every day. And I'm not going to stop and I'm just going to do it. And that was really the beginning of my kind of writing career, even though it was just really kind of like free writing. But it was that commitment to writing that really started on January 20th. I still have the notebook and just wrote notebooks and notebooks and notebooks. And so much of it was on spiritual writing. And then within a year's time, I'd gotten a deal to do this kind of small book on the rosary that became really kind of a guiding point in my life. And so that's really kind of things in a nutshell. And from there, I've gone on to write numerous books and also just kind of I got the chance to just work with some really great folks in the spirituality and religion market. And it all kind of like hook and by crook and step by step, I got to work with Scott Hahn and Bishop Barron and Cardinal Dolan and John Allen and Colin Carroll Campbell, Amy Wellborn, and all of these great authors at Loyola Press, including getting to work with Vanita for years and working with you, Eric, and yeah, and I've just been really fortunate in what I've been able to do. So
awesome. Thank you. How about you, Vanita?
I started out as a music major because although I've been writing stories, I mean, long stories, since 4th grade, nobody in my family knew anyone who made a living at writing. And of course, I came from a small working class background. You go into the area where you're pretty sure to get a job. And I love music. I was good at music. But just a few years into my music teaching career, my voice started to go. And I realized if I have developed nodules at year 5, there's no way I can do this for another 20 some years. I can't be a teacher. And so I went to grad school. I mean, long story short, I decided it, and I've been writing in the cracks for years. I was a music major, taking all the creative writing courses I could fit in, getting stuff published in the campus literary magazine. I'd had stuff published when I was in 8th grade in Read magazine. Some of us are old enough to remember that. Won first in a national writing contest in 8th grade. But again, it never occurred to me that I could really do writing. It was just like something I enjoyed doing on the side. But when I decided to change careers, I thought, well, I should do something that at least gets me closer to words, because I never get tired of words. And got my graduate degree in communications. Before I had finished all of my coursework, I was hired as an assistant editor at a very small publisher in the Chicago suburbs and went on from there. I worked there 4 years, becoming a senior editor there. Then I moved to another company, started as a senior editor. And I was there 4 years, and then by then I was married and I needed to work closer to where I lived. So I had a friend who worked at Loyola Press. I said, I've got to work closer to home. I got to work in the city. I can't do this long commute anymore. And she got me in at Loyola Press. And I became better acquainted with Catholicism, because I grew up out of sort of a Baptist fundamentalist milieu, and became acquainted with St. Ignatius because it was a Jesuit press. So I ended up editing things about the spiritual exercises in Ignatius, and things started clicking. And by this time I'd published 3 novels already, and I had learned a lot of things about the interior life through my fiction work. I mean, I really learned about spirituality through my work as a creative. And then when I was reading in Ignatius's work, I realized he's talking about the same thing. He's talking about an interior world where you can notice what's happening. And anyway, I became a real fan of Ignatius, so much so that later I became trained in the Ignatian tradition as a spiritual director. So by the time I retired just a couple of years ago from full-time editing and moved across the country, I had been certified as a spiritual director. So, and I've been writing all along this time. It's just the way I process my life. And I've been fortunate in that the things that I found important, evidently readers found important too. So sometimes those things go together, sometimes they don't. And I'm still writing. I'm still writing fiction. I'm still writing nonfiction. Actually, I'm getting more opportunities than I thought I would. And I'm enjoying a wonderful vocation as a spiritual director, which just feeds the writing, because it's just amazing to, be witness to people's spiritual journeys and their interior becoming. And that just is more material to think about and to write about. So I continue to do a little bit of freelance editing. I teach editing courses online for University of Chicago, so I don't think I'm going to escape editing anytime soon. But it's fun to teach, especially younger people about how words work. So that's been a great thing in my life as well.
Yeah, busy retirement for you, Vanita.
Oh, well, we Christians, we don't retire to stop working. We retire to do different work.
Right.
So I never intended to be sitting around. No. This has been good.
Vanita keys up, I think, a really important, helpful question about how does I know kind of you're all people of faith, and I wonder how working in this space of spiritual writing affects your own faith journey or your own understanding of spirituality. Just briefly, and you hit on this already, so maybe Keely or Gary, either of you have any thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Gary.
Oh, sure. Yeah, just to echo what Vanita says, it influences and elevates and just creates awareness. So when I've been really fortunate over the years just to work with some great writers, and it's like being in school, so it's a constant education, and it's a constant reminder of the importance of God in people's lives, and that creative response, and to be able to, when you're working with authors, you're working with creatives, you're working with artists, and oftentimes, like in this space, sometimes it gets slightly neglected, or because if you write a novel, there's a certain cachet that comes with it, a certain notoriety that might go with it. Where you're writing spiritual nonfiction, that comes with its own set of overhanging arches and stuff like that. But there's real artistry going on with a number of writers, and I love that, and that inspires me, it elevates me, it frustrates me sometimes, and so for me, it's always an education. It's being in this space, I've been really fortunate to just have all of these great teachers over the years.
I think I would echo that. I feel like it's really deepened my faith to work in this space. I feel like I have been challenged in so many ways and have encountered just so many different experiences of the ways that people come to know God. So it really has broadened my understanding of what a faith life can look like.
Awesome, thank you. So let's get into kind of the writing of the book, kind of like, and I think it starts with defining what differentiates spiritual writing from other genres. How do you know it when you see it? And then what do you do with that? So Gary, you're tasked with acquiring new books in this genre. So maybe we can start with you. How do you know spiritual writing when you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the simplest thing is usually God is mentioned somewhere in the first page, usually, but not always. And I think it's really like the type of spiritual writing, because as an acquisitions editor for Loyola Press, that's what I'm getting. I mean, I should say 90% of what I'm getting. You do get folks who just are mailing out their science fiction novel and they just found Loyola Press and they're just sending it straight to the submission box. So you do get those type of submissions. And so that's a great way. So if you're submitting, maybe do a little bit of homework before you submit, because that's always a good idea. You don't want to send a science fiction novel. That's really kind of can be just very strange and very weird, but we do get those submissions. So yeah, so it's about like, what do people, it's the type of spiritual writing that we get that's that I'm always kind of in that question of in my mind, what's going on here? How does this relate to other folks? And yeah, and just knowing, and there's some people who write, there's so many different writing styles, so many different authors, so many different points of view. The thing that brings them together is this search, right? Is the search for, is that yearning. And I think some of the best books over the years are about that spiritual yearning, because I think we all kind of feel it. And when we can resonate with the author in that kind of like desire for closeness, for that unison, for understanding, for awareness, then I think that when we can resonate with the author and the author resonates with us, that's what makes for like a big hit book, and a book that just reaches wide and can become very, very popular.
Awesome, thank you. So Keely, you're tasked with kind of helping an author hone their voice and then ultimately kind of selling the book. So maybe you can tell us from your perspective, how do you differentiate or define spiritual writing?
Yeah, one of the big things I focus on with my writers is what is your end goal for the reader? And so in spiritual writing, it's really thinking about how are you helping someone deepen their faith or wrestle with difficult questions or doubts. Really kind of thinking about, yeah, what if
Keely, I think we lost your mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Oh, my internet is getting a little unstable. Sorry. Let me know if I drop out again. But yeah, just saying it's, really focusing on how are you bringing the reader along with you in this sort of deepening path of faith.
Awesome, thank you. And Vanita, you obviously have written a number of these books, but also are really in the weeds as the editor, helping people kind of bring out, really fine tune and crystallize their points. So maybe you can talk from your perspective how, what spiritual writing looks like and how it is differentiated.
Well, what I look for in what I think is high quality spiritual writing is a sense of exploration in the writer. This is not someone who has all the answers. When they sound like they know it, they know more than they do, I get really nervous, and it's usually not a good sign. There's always that sense of humility of, yeah, I'm writing about this, reader, but we're kind of exploring this together. What does this mean? What does this kind of prayer feel like and look like? And so there's always that I think a sense of mystery in good spiritual writing, and that we're here to just find out more about this amazing thing. And it has to be honest. I think sometimes when people are trying to be, spiritual, they kind of gloss over the hard stuff, and also kind of try to tie up ends, make things a little tighter than they are in real life. And that's always a red flag to me, because real life is not tidy, and our great spiritual examples, they were not tidy people. And a lot of the best writing came out of great suffering. So I look for honesty. I look for that sense of exploration, a sense of open-endedness. There may be 2 or 3 points that I really feel I can make in this book that I'm writing, because experience bears them out, and I have stories to tell about it. And I can with some authority talk about something I've discovered about spirituality. But a lot of what I will end up writing in any given article or book is more like, well, here's stuff that we still are trying to figure out. And yet what a glorious way of life this is, to always be learning and discovering the spiritual realities of our world, the spiritual realities in my own life. So, honesty without being all self-important or whiny, or, I mean, we all have read those books and we think this person needed to go to a therapist before they wrote this because they're still working out their stuff. So, but those things, they show up pretty quickly. But just that honesty and
Oh, Vanita, I think we lost your mic now.
it's on.
There we go. All right, you're back.
There we
You're
go.
back.
You're
Okay.
back.
So I was just summing up anyway. But I think that sense of a really good spirituality writer is always willing to be in awe, just to be in awe of what they're discovering. So
Awesome.
that's all I'll say. And before my mic decides to get flaky again.
Yeah, we got some real ghosts in the machine today.
Yeah,
So next question. So we're talking about what is spiritual writing, right? Because it might seem like an obvious question, but if we're going to do it, we want to really be able to sink into it. And I think, Vanita, you actually have again kind of pushed us into the next domain here, which is what are some of the temptations that spiritual writers may fall into? I think you highlighted a really important one, and you write about it in your book here. Folks that feel that they are kind of processing out loud in book form what perhaps belonged in a therapy session, right? And that a spiritual book is not copy and paste from your diary. It's a different thing. So let's so Keely, maybe you can kick us off this time. What are some of the temptations that you think spiritual writers are most susceptible to, and how do you help kind of push them towards where they ultimately need to go if they want this book to be successful?
Yeah, I think Vanita really just touched on this as well. There's a real temptation to want to tie things up for your reader, to make it a clean, linear narrative with an ending that is tied up with a bow. And that's not how the spiritual life is. That's not how most of us experience faith. And so my encouragement is to allow things to be messy, to expect that your reader will be able to come along with you. I think sometimes our expectations for our readers are too low. People are willing to do the hard work and to wrestle through difficult questions. They want honesty and authentic vulnerability. They don't necessarily need you as the writer to solve their problem or give them the answer. And I think that ends up making for these more cliched books that just don't stand the test of time. It's okay to leave your reader in a place of uncertainty.
That's really helpful. Leaving people in a state of uncertainty. I think that's a good advice. Gary, what would you say? Same question.
Yeah, so I think one of the definitions of poetry that I remember from being in college is from William Wordsworth, that poetry is emotion recollected in tranquility. And I think the same goes for spiritual writing. That and there's different stages in terms of like producing your writing, producing a book. I'm all for throw everything down on the page, write. But the real book comes out of rewriting, and it's through recollecting, and through the period that you need to take where you're observing yourself and you're processing what you've written. And so, by the time like a manuscript hopefully gets to like a submission or comes in as a submission or has gone to Keely or is in the process of editing, that the author's really done like a lot of work. And I think part of that is there's a lot of energy that's exerted when you're writing, a lot of mental energy, psychological energy, emotional energy. And that's all great. Get it down on the page. I'm all for that. But then it's that recollection and tranquility, taking time to really try to be at peace through the process, not to rush it, and to you have to bring a certain level of awareness to the work that you've done. And so being able to kind of get to a quiet place, get to a place where you're not so emotionally charged that you can look at something from a distance. And I think that's the toughest thing. And I'm sure Vanita can back me up as an editor about this, is that as a writer, you may get really attached to something that's just horrible, that just doesn't belong in your manuscript. It doesn't need to be said out loud. And you have to be pretty ruthless as a writer to like just cut and to be able to whittle things down. Even if you love it, it doesn't mean it necessarily belongs there. So there's a certain level of ruthlessness for yourself that you need to be as a writer, and just this, and this intentional, and just being intentional about what you're doing. And part of that really just comes through setting aside time and really like focusing, trying to approach your work through a sense of tranquility and kind of seeing it again for the first time each time you go through it.
Thanks, Gary. That's I think really helpful. It's almost like a spiritual practice, what you're describing as you're kind of going through this process of writing. Vanita, I want to give you a chance to come with this question now that it's been posed. But I also, you with the spiritual director hat on as well, I think probably have a viewpoint of kind of helping people reflect as they're writing or as they're editing. So I wonder if that perspective adds anything for you as you're helping people to avoid these common pitfalls in spiritual writing.
Yeah, I mean, so much of, I consider creative work as spiritual work. There's no distance between the two. It's all a spiritual function. And so the more a person can be self-aware, the more he or she can notice patterns of work or writing practice that help rather than hinder. The more a person can recognize when they're in a place where they have a lot of bias in one direction or another and can kind of sort that out. There has to be a real self-awareness. Now, unfortunately, we just don't pop up and have self-awareness. It's an ongoing process. And often it happens as we do the writing. And I'm right with Gary. When people are trying to write, I say, just write whatever you want to write. Just write it. Write. And then when you're all finished, you're going to have what I call a holy mess. You're going to have to come back to that mess and sort through it at some point when you're ready and say, okay, what's here? What's here? Not all of it is appropriate for general consumption, but there's something here that I think I can draw that thread, and I can really now kind of concentrate on a helpful narrative for other people. So, I can't overemphasize how much spiritual interior work must happen in the person who's going to write on spirituality. If you're not doing your own spiritual work, your own interior exploration of the landscape, you may write something, you may be a good writer, so you can make something look pretty good, but the depth that you want to reach to really help other people, it's just not going to happen. You've got to do your own work somehow or another.
Yeah, and to your point, Vanita, I mean, the work is the work, right? So being able to do the work kind of like, so there is a processing period like through it. And I think that's through all creative endeavors, just being able to like be in it, do it. And and the other advice too is like, well, I think it's so important for you to just write and get it on the page, is that when you're a writer, you can edit yourself a lot as you go along. And that one, it delays you, one, it kind of makes you second guess. And I think the whole idea of just kind of like getting it down, just to get it down. Now it does take work, right? To go back there and like do cutting and to like analyze and to just sit with stuff and meditate on things and contemplate like what you've done. But, whatever you can do not to edit yourself in the beginning, I would just do, right? And that, and again, it comes through the process. And years ago, before I remember someone had sent me a magnet, because I kept saying to her this over and over again. This is 15 years ago. Trust the process, right? There's a process in writing a book. There's a process in everything, and to just trust it. But you have to go through those stages. A lot of times the problems come when we want to jump the stage, right? We want to like, hey, I want to get ahead, and we're all impatient, I think, is great. Well, not, I shouldn't say all of us, but a lot of us are impatient as creatives. And so, but just trust that process.
Can I jump in here, Eric? I really wanted to go along with what he's saying. in working with a lot of writers over the years, and in facilitating writers' workshops and retreats for many years, I've come to a couple conclusions, and they haven't been disproven yet. One is that there are basically two processes that happen in the creative life in writing. One is the generative process, and one is the analytical process. The generative process is when you're just writing until you've run out of stuff to write. The analytic process is when you go back and you edit. In very, very few people can those two brain processes work at the same time. And I find that what gets in a lot of writers' ways, especially when they're just starting out trying to figure it out, is they haven't figured out yet when they're doing one or the other. And so they're working against their own process. You know, after a while you recognize, you know, today's a generative day. I'm just going to write, and whatever it looks like, I'm not going to worry about it. I just need to write today. And then you'll realize later, okay, 3 days ago, I wrote that piece of a chapter. I think I'm ready to go back and really get into it now. So much of what I have done with writers over the years is help them learn what their personal process is, because there's not one process. If some famous writer tells you this is the process, then just walk away. They don't know what your process is. They know what their process is. And each thing you work on has its own internal process. So you have to learn to be sensitive to, okay, what am I doing now? And what's the purpose? Or, you know, pay attention to those things. And then you'll end up working with yourself instead of against yourself. And the one other thing I want to say before I forget is that as people of faith, we can work out of this sense of abundance, okay, and not scarcity. What that means is that there is enough grace and wonderful to go around. You don't have to worry about somebody beating you to writing this book, or who got a contract and I didn't get a contract. That's very much in the ether in the world of publishing. It's very much there. But if you have this sense of abundance, that means that whatever words come to you, you can hold them lightly. You can learn to play with your words rather than cling to them, afraid that you'll never have such a wonderful sentence again. You know, it's always going to be there. There's always going to be that wellspring of creativity. And we have to learn to think in terms of, it's an abundant world. There's plenty for me to understand and learn and explore and write about. Because if we don't have that, if we have a sense of scarcity, we are going to be more likely to cling to our words and not be willing to edit, not be willing to play with maybe doing this a different way. You know, maybe I thought this was a short story. Maybe it's actually a poem. I mean, you just never know.
Yeah, and to your point, Vanita, it all, part of it kicks back to the Ignatian idea of just detachment.
Yeah.
That's tough. I mean, because, you know, as creatives and working with authors for so many years, we get attached to our stuff. But being able to learn the art of detachment really does open up flow, right? And the more, and that's why just like the whole process of just being consistent, writing every day, or writing as much as you possibly can, opens up flow, right? And flow is it's something that's been studied scientifically, and being able to, and it does like create this allows the creative process to have this energy to it, which is why if you can along the way practice the art of detachment, you know, from an Ignatian perspective or other, you know, faith-based perspective, it's transformative, because once you can say, hey, you know what, I love that a lot, but that's got to go. Or, you know what, maybe this is a song, maybe this is a novel, maybe this is this. I didn't realize what it was going to be. Once you can like allow that to enter your heart, things just, you know, it's revolutionary.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're just free. You're free to do your work. Yeah. You're free to just do the work and not be so, you know, bound up about it.
I think we're really getting at that intersection where the spirituality comes in, right? You know, spiritual writers have to practice spirituality, or be, you know, spiritual in some way. And I think this is really helpful. I want to pick up on just two things. One, each of you said something to the effect, way back when, of keeping the audience in mind, which I feel like in some ways feels like a super markety way, and spiritual writers might be, oh, that's anathema, I don't want to talk about that. But first of all, marketing is very important, and second, keeping the audience in mind, keeping the you're writing for in mind is key, because you're trying to express something for someone else's spiritual benefit. So I think I just want to underline that point you each made in a unique way. And the other thing that was said to me once, or I read once, was if the idea doesn't stay with you for 24 hours, perhaps it wasn't a great idea. And so I try to tell myself that while I'm like getting migraines, brushing my teeth, because I'm not putting a note down on my my computer. Let's get to another question, and I'm going to try and kind of pull in a few of the ideas that are popping in the chat here. But I think there's a sense of both readiness, or there's an interest in readiness. How do I know I'm ready to write, or ready to submit, or ready to bring myself to this? And I'm also curious, kind of bound up in that is, how do you know you're writing the right thing? Why is this not an essay versus a book? Why is this idea? Why are you ready to write a book as opposed to, a series of fortune cookie inserts, right? So, Keely, I'm going to give it to you, because you would be the first point of contact in this process. How do you help people to discern readiness and form?
Yeah, I would say readiness depends a lot on, where are you in this process? Have you been practicing your craft? Have you done everything that you can to become the strongest writer that you can be before you're getting this in front of agents and publishers? This should not be your first draft that's going out into the world. In terms of form and figuring out if it's the right project, part of that is just, do you have 45,000 words to say on this topic? Is this something that you can sort of create the outline, the backbone of a book for, and envision how this is going to flow over the course of 10 or 12 chapters? And then again, is this something that is a must read for your reader? Is this something that someone is going to pay $30 for and invest 10 hours in? Or is it, just a beautiful piece of writing that could be an essay that they could read in 10 minutes for very little buy-in? So really, you do have to think about the marketplace, and is this something that is worth both you investing the time and energy to create, and someone else investing the time and money to consume it?
It's really helpful. Keely, I want to ask you one follow-up on this. A lot has been said about process. Obviously, there's a process that gets to this point. What are like the nuts and bolts you put your writers, your authors through for this kind of discernment process?
Yeah, I guess it's different. It's different for everybody. But usually where we start is, coming up with a table of contents chapter outline. So can you really flesh out this book, put meat on the bone? Is there enough there to carry you through? And so even just like writing a paragraph to summarize each chapter, because that kind of helps you see, like, is there enough here? Could this be condensed? Are you writing two different books? So really getting that bare bones table of contents is kind of where I would start.
Awesome. Thank you. Vanita, how about you? What's what was my question? Readiness. What's the readiness factor and the form factor? How do folks say, yes, I'm going to write a book as opposed to an essay, and I'm going to do it now?
I think, and this will differ according to personality and all that, but sometimes the only thing you can really do is experiment, which means you have to be willing to waste a lot of time. I will never forget, I was in the third draft of the last novel I wrote, which was years ago, and I kept slipping into into present tense when I was writing it. And I thought, well, I'll just try present tense for a chapter and see what happens. Well, I wrote a chapter in present tense, and guess what? That was the right way to write it. Well, guess what? I had to go back and rewrite the whole book. I'd written it in past tense, but I realized present tense is the way I need to go. So it's a total rewrite. And so I think sometimes if you just kind of set out and say, okay, I'm gonna make this into an essay, and just try it, give it a couple days, see what happens. or I'm going to flesh this out into a longer piece. I love the idea of Keely of the outline, because once you start trying to describe what you're going to do, you begin to see how much material you do or don't have. And that helps you figure out. I know that we're supposed to keep the audience in mind. I think for some writers, not all, again, it depends on your personality. Some writers, that really kind of cramps them up in the early stages of writing. Sometimes you just have to do the writing, like Gary was saying, just get it all out and work with it a bit until you even know what you have. And after that point, I think it's helpful to imagine an audience. But sometimes the stuff, it needs a little bit more formation time. So you just need to be aware of what works for you and what doesn't work for you. For some people, having an audience in mind helps them even in the early stages, but not everybody is helped by that. So they have to wait until they're a little further along. I tell writers, this has become my mantra, pay attention to where the energy is. Where's the energy? Where at what point does something just really ignite in you and you've got something to say and it begins to flow? That is, I think that's the best indicator of, you know, where you are and what you're ready to work on. But honestly, you've got to be willing to try writing this as an article for a few days and then try writing it as something else if you really don't have a strong sense of what it is. Experimentation will just get you a long ways, actually, in a pretty short time.
Yeah, boy, you guys are giving me a little bit of anxiety now with your feedback here, but for my own writing processes. But Gary, how about you? How are you going to put our minds at ease?
Well, I'll piggyback on Benita's story about writing in present tense. So I'd signed a contract years ago to write a memoir about growing up in a haunted house. It was called Holy Ghost, and I had 9 months to do it because in order to get it out, we needed it done at a certain point to get it out for Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had about 8 months to write it. I spent 5 months and I had just read just as I signed the contract, I read Andre Agassi's memoir called Open, but all written in the first in the present moment, in the present tense. And I loved it. I was like, you know what? I'm writing a book just like this one. And so I go off, which is different than what I put in the proposal, and I just start writing in present tense. And I do basically my first draft, and I can't wait to show it. I think it's the world's greatest thing in the world. I've spent 5 or 6 months on it, and I show it to the editor just so he can get a chance to take a look at it. And I don't nothing, crickets, which is not that's not crazy. I mean, editors are busy, so sometimes it takes them a while.
Mm-hmm.
Almost a week goes by, and I get this email, and it basically said, "What the heck happened here? What did you do? You'd written this proposal. It was in the past tense. It was just kind of straight. It was journalistic. It was true. And now you've written this kind of piece of garbage in first person. What is this?" And it crushed me. And because I was trying to imitate something else and trying to be who I was. And so he gave me all this feedback. I didn't cry, but I could have cried. And I had 3 months now to rewrite the whole thing. And I rewrote the thing in 3 months. Again, sent it back to him after taking his advice, and his advice was right on.
Oh, yeah.
And it took me 6 months and rewrote it again in 3 months, handed it to him, didn't hear from him for a week. And then late, 11 o'clock on Friday night, I get an email that just said, bravo, you did it, but there was this sense of trying to imitate something that wasn't true to me. And then, and that was really, but there I was 6 months of basically being completely unaware of what I was doing. And as Benita was saying, it's wasted time. I don't think it's wasted time because it gets you where it needs to be. So it's never really a waste. So, yeah. But there is this when you can look at it oh my God, I wasted 6 months. But no, you spent 6 months getting to a place where you could do the work that you needed to do.
Yeah.
And then I tell this story all the time, just in terms of because this is Rilke was a poet from the Czech Republic, Germany. He started to work with Rodin, the famous sculptor, as his secretary. And one day Rodin asks him, "Hey, so how do you create? Like, how do you write, Rilke?" And Rilke says, "Well, when I'm inspired, I'll sit down and I'll write a poem, you know?" And Rodin's like, "Oh my God, that is the worst possible thing that you could do. You don't write when you're inspired. You work, and the inspiration comes from that. You write every day, you work, and the inspiration will come." And that revolutionized Rilke. And he went from like writing a poem here and there to writing massive amounts of poetry and novels and letters and short stories, because he started working every day, and that worked for him, you know. And I think it actually is really good advice. But this idea of just when you do the work will come.
Well, I have a book in that stage, Gary, where I'm waiting to hear back. So I know my anxiety has increased twice over with both your. But I like the ending. You ended strong. Now I feel inspired. No, this is all super helpful, and I hope I feel like I'm just trying to speak on behalf of the audience here. I know this is a question we got from a bunch of folks ahead of time. I think I've seen a couple iterations of it in the chat here. But and I'll ask it in 3 different ways. What are you looking for in a spirituality book now? What does a successful spirituality book look like in the year 2024? And what do you think the world needs from spiritual writing right now? Right. So kind of the same question, 3 different ways. And I will, Keely, you can start us off again on this one.
Yeah. Well, something I'm looking for and just personally interested in is really good spiritual writing that is engaging with technology. I just think that this conversation is accelerating, in this era of AI, and I feel like Christians should be on the forefront of talking about how to have this conversation faithfully, and what it means to be human. And I'm really on the lookout for some good, smart spiritual writing that's engaging at kind of that intersection of faith and technology. I'll kick it over to Gary or Benita.
Meanwhile, Keely's inbox fills up with 20 pitches on how to. Gary, how about you? You're acquiring books, right? So what are you looking for? And what does the world need? What would be successful in this moment?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot. Well, first, let me start off. There's a lot of great writers out there doing great stuff. There's also a lot of noise, and so you're always looking for something that kind of like cuts through the noise. And so and normally it's just something that, and this is not to be gimmicky, but something that's counterintuitive, like in something that grabs people's attention, because so much of, there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of books written on the spiritual life, on spirituality. And sometimes they can sound a lot alike, right? And it's, and part of that is because the spiritual process is a process that's pretty, there is an arc, right? In terms of going from a place of darkness to a place of light. So it's not necessarily the arc, but it's really kind of like trying to find those folks who see things slightly differently, right? Who use metaphor in a good way. And I've been really interested in just the use of metaphor. And I'm always, because spiritual writing can also get very abstract. And so a lot of times if I'm editing, I'll write back and I'll just say, hey, how can you give flesh to the word here? How can you make the word made flesh? How can you, and try this metaphor, try using a metaphor to help take an abstraction and make it concrete. So looking for something that's counterintuitive, or not necessarily counterintuitive, but something that says the same old thing over and over again, but says it in a different way. Because we've all had these like similar experiences in general, but each one is individual. Each is an individual experience. And to second what Keely was saying about AI. Right now, I'm a proponent of AI. I love AI. I think I think it can like increase like your conversations in terms of like spiritual awareness. And we'll see how it goes. It's not going away. So how do we use that in our work? How do you use that in your writing? How do you use that? How do you have a conversation with AI? Can you have a conversation with AI about God? So all of those things are really, really interesting to me.
Benita, how about you? What does the world need? What are you looking for?
Well, there's the question of what the world needs, and then what the world knows it needs. You know, in publishing, especially in religious publishing, for decades we've struggled with, well, the world needs this book, but the world doesn't want that book, even if it may need it. So I have to speak more from just spiritual directors and a writer's perspective in this instance, because I'm not acquiring books, I'm not working directly for a publisher. I really would like to see people of faith having a more prophetic voice in the world. It's really a shame that sometimes we're the last people to catch on to something like, you know, anti-racism or the kinds of things that you've got a lot of people writing really strong books about this movement or that movement, or you know, just world situations that need to be addressed. Right now, as a spiritual director, I just see over and over the damage, the absolute damage that has been done to people through sloppy theology.
Mhm.
You know, and a church that has been riddled with American culture more than the gospel, you know, informing that culture. We've spent decades, centuries conforming to things. I would, you know, I don't know if that kind of a book would sell. I think Gary would have a really hard time selling that kind of a book in-house, because we want things that people are going to like and they're going to talk well about. But I think there still should be a place for people of faith to just tell the truth and ask the hard questions, you know, make people squirm a little, because there are a lot of things that are not working well.
Yeah.
And if people of faith would just step up and have faith, you know, and speak up for the marginalized. I mean, all through the Old Testament and New Testament. I mean, just pay attention to what Jesus actually said. Sometimes I think these people, they've not even read the Gospels, the kinds of things that you see. And so you know, I'm speaking as a person who sits with people who have been damaged, who are struggling to have any kind of faith because of just the sorry shape the institutional church has often been in, and how badly it has managed things. So I'm hoping that there will be a few people out there who will just write very truthfully in a gutsy way, but in a way that invites people to something better. As it turns out, I'm beginning to speak this kind of thing when I am in front of people. I don't know if I'll end up writing it, but it just seems to be the thing that's on my mind now. There's always going to be space for a few of those people, but you got to be willing not to be a bestseller. You know, you got to be willing to just put it out there because it needs to be there.
Well, don't worry.
Sermon over. Sorry.
The next session is on becoming a bestseller and marketing. So that's a good comment for this session. We're just writing in this.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's super helpful. And I think, again, in some ways, each of you talked about really responding to the signs of the times, right? Which requires reflection and discernment and a healthy prayer life and community with which to try out ideas. So I think that's, and again, I think a lot of, I mean, this isn't about me, but I think a lot of what you're saying, Benita, would try some of these things out in essay form first.
Oh, yeah.
And at the Jesuit Conference, we accept essay submissions. So I'm just going to throw that out there too. We have about 5 or so minutes left. So I want to get, there's a few questions here. There's some kind of like really tactical, logistical questions that you guys can talk to. First, there's one about the role, maybe Keely, you can speak to this. The role of a literary agent. Is a literary agent required to submit to places like Loyola Press or other kind of Catholic Christian publishers? So maybe Keely, you can talk to that, and maybe while you're talking to that, you can also answer this question: what kind of general stage should a manuscript be in when it's being pitched?
Yeah, so it kind of depends. Most Christian publishers will accept proposals from authors without an agent if they're under the Big Five umbrella, so Zondervan or Convergent or Hachette. those houses are not going to accept manuscripts unless the author is agented. But I would say in most, and Gary and Benita can speak to this from their side, but I think in most situations, publishers are very happy and editors are very happy for you to have an agent. It just makes it a smoother process. It means that the proposal or the manuscript is coming already having been through, some workshopping and editing. And it means that you have somebody kind of alongside you, guiding you, telling you what's normal and what's not, and just kind of keeping your relationship with your editor and publisher creative, and your agent can kind of handle some of the stickier things that come up. In terms of what state your manuscript should be in, if you're writing nonfiction, I sell all of my nonfiction projects on proposal. So that means we've got a proposal, which is kind of like a business plan for the publisher. This is why we think this is going to sell. And then it's got 2 or 3 sample chapters. You can have more than that written. You certainly don't need to have a full manuscript. And in fact, I would encourage you not to have a full manuscript written before you start trying to shop it to publishers, because your editor will want to weigh in on it. They'll want to help kind of direct what the final product is going to be. For fiction, you need a full manuscript, but when it comes to nonfiction, a couple sample chapters and then a really clear vision for what the book is going to look like.
Briefly, Keely, can you tell people how they find an agent?
Yeah. One of the best ways is to look in the acknowledgments of books that you read, and people think they're agents, figure out who represents writers who are in sort of the same space as you. There are a lot of online resources. So Publishers Marketplace is one, Query Tracker. There are a bunch of different sort of literary agent databases out there. And then go to the agency websites, see, what the requirements are, what they're representing. But yeah, I would say mostly online databases is where I would start looking.
Gary, briefly, can you give the kind of the reverse side of the experience of the editor dealing with an agented writer, or maybe also just receiving a submission from a kind of a writer by themselves?
Yeah, I think my career is slightly different. When I was working at PRH, and this is no offense, Keely, I came there later in terms of editorial, so I didn't have great relationships with agents. It's great when you start off as an assistant and you can become friends with the assistant of agents, and then all of a sudden you get bigger and bigger. But I came in a little bit later, and no agents would talk to me, and they just had relationships with everybody else, and they didn't feel the need that I was important. So that forced me to go out there and look for stuff. So when I was at Convergent, I actually did take unsolicited manuscripts, and I reached out to people who were authors or had done talks and just said, hey, you know what, would you be interested in doing this book? So I think a lot of the ideas for the books that I published came from the ideas that I had, or from reading someone's online profile or something like that, or an article they wrote, and kind of created my own way of doing things. And so there was a question there about, does Loyola take unsolicited manuscripts from people who don't have agents? Yes, we do. So you can just go onto the website. And so it is good to deal with agents. Like dealing with Keely, she is awesome. But dealing with agents brings with it, as much as it offers protection for the author. It offers protection really for the publisher. But I'm just kind of a guy who grew up as a mechanic's son, or a carpenter. Really, my dad was a carpenter and a mechanic, and we dealt with things one-on-one. So, for me, it was always I like to work with people one-on-one. And so when those manuscripts come in, try to get back to people as quickly as possible, but we get inundated with submissions. And that's one thing also to keep in mind. You've worked on a book, it means a lot to you. When you send it in, just realize that there are hundreds of other people who have worked on something that's really important, and they've sent it in. And usually there's 1 or 2 people that are going through everything, and it takes time. It takes time. We try to get back to everybody as quickly as possible. And we try to give consideration. So that can be a little difficult in some of the the zaniness in publishing. So yeah, I think there's positives in all ways, and I think, you know, if you're looking just to write like for a Catholic space, you might just be able to query like publishing houses, as Keely was saying. If you're looking to go bigger, if you're trying to be the next Sarah Bessey, if you're trying to be, you know, someone of that caliber, then you're going to need an agent. And Keely's advice of just checking the back of books is most important, but do your homework, right? Do your homework about, you know, what other books this person has published, or what other books these people have, the agents have represented. And because the more that you actually do your homework, it's like going into an interview. You know, people appreciate that. They really do appreciate that you take the time to kind of do your homework. So when you get a submission that's just, again, the science fiction soft porn thing that we get, you know, that came in to Lord of the Press, and I'm like, do you have any idea who we are? And they didn't. You know, don't do that. That is just the bad thing. Do your research, spend some time, and yeah, and just yeah, spend the time.
I hope that person isn't on the call who wrote that. My friends, it's the top of the hour. There is a part 2 to this, so all of our panel will be back. I've put the link in the chat here. I'll send a follow-up email as well. But as I hope this has gotten a lot of questions in your mind, send them to me, and I'll program them out for our next session, which will focus more on the selling of the book, the marketing of it, which will be a lot of fun. So thank you to everyone who is here. Again, you all have my email address. Please, any questions, comments, concerns, and thank you to our panel. And we'll see you on May 8th.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for everyone.
Thanks.
You.